The perfect sandwich bread is the quest of every baker I know that uses fresh milled flour. And after a year of working on my recipe, I have finally come up with a combination that's our favorite. So bake with me today as I make the perfect sandwich bread. Hey friends, it's Barbara Sue from Kowalski Mountain and welcome back to our channel. Now when you first start baking with fresh milled flour, even as an experienced baker, it is a challenge. I don't think anyone anticipates the learning curve as you make the transition from all-purpose flour to fresh milled flour. But finally, I have found a bread that my husband will eat, and we are endeavoring to make 100% of our bread right here on the homestead. Now you might have seen my first bread making video right up here that's extremely popular, and I do still use that base recipe. But over the last year I have perfected it and tweaked it and made it even better. So today I'm going to share with you my tweaked recipe so you can enjoy this sandwich bread at home too. Now the perfect sandwich bread starts with the wheat berries. Whenever you're making yeast breads that need to rise, you want a gluten-rich bread. Hard wheat berries are the basic wheat berry used in bread making. Hard wheat berries come in hard red and hard white. Now I have some hard red and it gives a much more whole wheat flavor to your bread, but we prefer the hard white wheat berries. Now over the last year I have broadened my horizons and I've been using some ancient grains. Now kamut is my absolute favorite wheat berry. Now this is a much more expensive grain, so I always mix it to make it go further, but just the infusion of this wheat berry into my bread recipe takes it to a whole new level. Now for today's recipe, I'm going to be grinding 6 cups of wheat berries. So I'm going to mix the kamut to hard white in a 1/3 basis. So 1/3 of it will be kamut, 2/3 will be hard white wheat, and we will mix those together for the bread. Now like all of my recipes, I keep them in my Recipe Keeper app, and I have an entire video all about the Recipe Keeper app and why it's my favorite, and you can see that right up here. Now my bread recipe is actually in my favorites folder, so it's easy to find. Now when I grind my flour, I go ahead and grind some extra, and anything that's left I'll put into the refrigerator for use around the house, but I want to make sure I have enough wheat berries. Now because we live in an RV, I can't leave my mill out, so I want to be sure that I have plenty of ground flour. So we're going to start by measuring out 4 cups of hard white wheat berries. And I'm going to add 2 cups of kamut. Now that my wheat berries are measured, I know that I'm going to have the perfect amount and I don't have to be so mindful while I'm running my mill. Today I'm going to be using the Nutrimill Harvest Grain Mill, and I want to make sure that I have it on the finest setting for flour. First got to tighten down, and I'm going to loosen it just a little to get it started, and then once we start grinding I'm going to tighten it down further. Now you always start your mill first so that the berries don't bind up the stones. Tightening. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. So first up, we're going to add some water. Now if you're not aware, when you measure liquids, you should always look at it straight on rather than down here. Because down here, it might look full, but when you look at it straight on, it might not be. We're going to add some olive oil. and some honey. Now today I'm using some wild honey from when Philip did a bee rescue. He rescued some bees that were in a tree that was destroyed by a tornado, and they had a ton of honey in their tree. Now, of course, we gave the bees some of their honeycomb as well, but we saved the rest. Next up is salt. And I'm using Redmond's real salt, and so as a result, sometimes it has clumps because it doesn't have anti-clumping agents in it, because it's completely natural salt. Now I'm also going to add some Vital Wheat gluten, and this just helps with the gluten structure. It helps with a good rise. Now the Vital Wheat gluten is completely optional. I just find that it helps. Now I'm also going to add some sunflower lecithin. Now this is something I've learned about over the year. This is completely optional, but one of the complaints that Philip had about my bread was it wasn't soft like store-bought bread. Now I've tried to convince him that it's not going to be store-bought bread. It's better. But he has an expectation of soft bread, and this helps. Now some bakers prefer not to use this, and they just add an additional egg to the recipe, which also can help with that. I'm going to add some eggs. Now we're going to go ahead and stir this up a little bit. Now we're going to go ahead and add the flour, and I need 6 3/4 cups. Now I've intentionally ground more flour than I know I need, that way I can have some when it comes time to need it, and then I just stick any extra into the refrigerator. Now my absolute favorite feature of my Bosch Universal Mixer is the cover. And I upgraded my mixer because my KitchenAid was struggling, especially with these dense breads. And the Bosch mixer has been an amazing addition to my kitchen, and you can see my review right up here. Well, let's go ahead and stir this up. Now you may have noticed I'm missing one very important ingredient in my bread, and that's the yeast. Now one of the things that I've learned over the year of using fresh ground flour is it's best to let it autolyse. And an autolyse means you allow it to rest. Fresh ground flour has all the parts of the wheat berries, and I have found over the last year that an autolyse allows that fresh ground flour to absorb the moisture. It allows the bran to soften, and it makes for a softer bread. Now you can let this rest for 30 minutes to 2 hours, and I personally always do 2 hours. I'm going to wrap it up in a towel and let it rest. The autolyse is finished, and now it's time for the next step. Now I know that an autolyse takes a lot of time for the bread, but it really makes a difference when it comes to a soft bread, and it's definitely worth the time. Now let's go ahead and see how this is doing. Now this bread still looks pretty wet to me, so I might add some flour. We're gonna see. But let's first add the yeast. And we're gonna see what happens. let that knead, and I'm going to start with about 10 minutes, but you need to watch your dough. Now if you have trouble with your dough and you're keeping your cover on, likely it's getting too hot inside the mixer. So I've left this open. Now I did put this cover on because that ensures that the dough stays down in the dish where it's getting kneaded. So let's let this knead and we're going to come right back. Now right here I am starting to see the dough really come together really nicely. It's formed a very cohesive ball of dough. And I'm just really happy with the way that that's looking right now. Now you could see it's still, earlier it was still a dough, but it wasn't like holding its shape together the way it is now. Now it's only been about 8 minutes, but I can see that this looks a little bit sticky. Now we do have a pretty good gluten structure here. This is a pretty good stretch, but it's still more wet than I want it to be. Now it's been under 15 minutes and I want to look at this dough. So here is our dough. And when people talk about the window pane, they're talking about the ability to stretch the dough. So you can see that this dough is stretching very nicely. I just stuck my finger through it so it tore. But you can see how the dough is allowing me to stretch it and it's not tearing. And we're getting pretty thin there. So I'm real happy with that. This is still a little more sticky than I really like it. I'm going to put that back in there. Now just to help with the stickiness, I'm going to do a little hand kneading. Now I'm not going to do too much, just a little to help with the stickiness. Now I really like the feel of this dough. It's nice and soft. It feels really pliable. Still a little sticky. But I'm happy with that. Now this is a little olive oil spritzer. I'm just going to roll this around a little bit. And we're going to let that rise. Now this is going to rise for an hour and then we're going to come back to shape the dough. So the first rise is done, so we're going to go ahead and get this in the pan. One of the things I've done to create the perfect sandwich bread is I've upgraded my pan. Now this is a Pullman pan and it comes with a lid and you bake it with the lid. Now this is going to make the perfect square 13-inch loaf that makes perfect sandwiches. Now if you've ever had bread cooked in a traditional sandwich loaf, it has that rounded top on the top and it doesn't always make for great sandwiches, especially like my loaf pans are very wide, so it makes a very wide sandwich with a rounded top, which is just kind of weird. The Pullman Pan lets me create perfectly shaped sandwich bread, and this has completely upped my bread making game. Now this is after the first rise. Now one of the things about this Pullman Pan is you don't want to put too much dough in it. It's made for a certain amount of dough, and if you put too much in, it can actually pop the lid off, which we don't want to happen. So I am going to measure out 1,200 grams of dough to go into that Pullman Pan. So let me get my scale set up here. And there we go. Too much still. We're at 1290, so we're going to do it with that. Now I don't prefer to roll this out with a rolling pin and then shape it. I want to keep the natural contours of this bread. The only thing I really want to do is make sure it's going to fit in my pan, which you can see that it's going to. Now the nice thing about this pan, you don't have to oil it, you don't have to line it, it's perfect just the way it is. Fit that in there. I'm going to slip on the lid, and then I'm going to put this in the oven to raise. I'm going to turn on the pilot light in my oven, and that's going to be just enough to make this rise perfectly. So this is ready. I'm just going to slip it right into the oven and let it rise. Now for the remainder of the dough, we're not going to let this go to waste. We're going to make dinner rolls. Now I use this dough for my hamburger buns, my dinner rolls, and my sandwich bread. Now I have figured out that the perfect hamburger bun has about 100 grams of dough. And I'm not going to make hamburger buns today, but I'm still going to make it that way. We're just going to roll this. Now these I'm going to leave out on the stove to rise a little bit slower because they're going to go in after the bread comes out. Now the second rise is complete. We're going to go ahead and turn on this oven and bake the bread. So we're going to turn it on to 350 degrees and we're going to bake it for 40 minutes. All right, now the time has not expired, but the bread was smelling very good. So I went ahead and checked the temperature, and the bread is 190 degrees, so it's ready to come out. I'm going to go ahead and slip these rolls in. And they're only going to bake about 10, maybe 12 minutes. The full bake time is 18 minutes, but I underbake them. I will finish a few of them for tonight's meal. The rest I will freeze, and I'll save them as like a brown and serve roll. I'll put them in the oven for like 8 minutes, and then we have hot rolls that taste like I just made them. Now we need to go ahead and get this bread out of the pan. Now you can see that it filled up the entire pan when it rose, so that means I'm going to have nicely shaped sandwich bread. And there it is. So we're going to let this cool and we'll come back and we'll cut it. The rolls are done. No worries. Now these are only partially cooked because remember I'm going to use these as brown and serve. Now I'm going to carefully get a few of these out so I can finish them for dinner. The bread has cooled and it's time to slice it up. Now to make nicely even slices, I do have a bread slicing device. You certainly don't need something like this, but it helps me to cut even slices to make the bread go even further. Now I'm going to start by just kind of cutting it in half. got a little air pocket there. It's fine. Now this goes in here. And now we slice. This slicer does have different widths, and so if you want thinner, you can choose down here. If you want thicker, you can choose here. Alright, now it's all sliced up. It does still feel slightly warm, so I'm going to hold off on wrapping it up. I wrap these slices into packs of 2 and I freeze it because we will not use this bread fast enough to leave it on the counter. So I'm going to let it completely cool before I wrap it up. Now the rolls are ready and we're just going to put these in a Ziploc. These will not last long at all. Now these are only partially cooked, so these are going to go into the freezer just like this. And then when I want to have them for dinner, I'll take them out in the morning, let them defrost during the day, and cook them for about 5 to 8 minutes in the oven so that they're like a brown and serve roll, and then they taste like they were just made. Alright, so we're just going to wrap these up. And I'm going to do one. So I just have some plastic wrap. I'm going to wrap them just in slices of 2. And then this will be ready to go into the freezer. Now my box is empty, so I need to find the next box. But this is what I'll do for all the bread. By putting this into the freezer, this will last us about a month, and then I'll make more bread when we need some. Well, friends, I hope you have enjoyed making bread with me, and over the last year I have perfected my recipe to a sandwich bread that we love. Be sure to make a comment below if you try out our bread. We'd love to hear how it went. As always, we really appreciate you watching, especially to the very end. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, hit that button. We'd love you to be a part of the Kowalski Mountain family. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.